I have spent my Sundays and Mondays about the last 3 weekends trying to carve through tie-breaking scenarios in all these conferences.
Haven't we all?
And so I try to tackle all of them. I was just starting to get to the Big 12, and my thought was, okay, I see Iowa State down there with 3 losses, and I see Baylor down there with 3 losses, and obviously you do the quick math, and they can catch them, meaning BYU and Colorado in the loss column. So I started to work through some of these tiebreakers, but I didn't get fully through it. So does somebody have a handle on this, and who can possibly win the Big 12 or get to the Big 12 championship game?
If
I, go
if
ahead.
you
I was just trying to get into it. Like my boss just asked me about it this morning. I
okay,
thought that if ASU won these 2 games, they were in, but maybe not necessarily. So I'm not exactly sure. I
yeah.
actually have a message out to the powers that be about that right now.
So if BYU wins out, they're in. If Colorado wins out, they're in. I think Arizona State has the tiebreaker. Well, if they beat BYU, they'd have the tiebreaker against BYU. Now BYU's out and Arizona State's in, playing against Colorado. The fall off and where you have these tiebreakers really kind of dig in is when you talk about Iowa State and you talk about Kansas State. Both these schools were way up and now they've come back to the pack a bit. And I think Iowa State has lost every tiebreaker going into the last 2 weeks of the season. So BYU wins out, they're in. If it gets dicey if they lose another game. Certainly, if they lose to Arizona State, then Colorado and Arizona State play for the conference championship game.
So the top 3 teams control their own destiny, is basically what you're saying.
Yes, that's right. Yeah,
And then, so even if Iowa State ties one of them as a 2 loss team right now, they don't play Arizona State. So we don't have a head to head to go to
right.
there.
Right. I think what the multitude of tiebreaker scenarios, the points scored versus points given up, total points played in a season. As far as I'm concerned, Mark, I wouldn't waste a bunch of time on it because next week it'll be something completely different, and teams will be in there that maybe we didn't even think about this week. So it's a mess. They need to get. What can we please in the off season start a charter that says we want every conference to go to divisions. You go to divisions and you get rid of
Right.
tiebreakers. That's what we
I
want to
agree.
have. Yeah.
I agree. It might be geographically tough the way this conference is, but yeah, it is a mess. And especially when you look at who's played who. Like Colorado, had a cakewalk schedule compared to everybody else. And again, you never know, how it's going to pan out. At the start of the year, it looked like ASU had a really tough schedule, but nobody expected Oklahoma State to be as bad as they are or Utah to
Right.
be as bad as they are. But like if, when you look at who's kind of playing who, Colorado's kind of lucked out here in the fact that they haven't played a couple of the other top teams, including Arizona State. And
Right.
I don't think they played BYU either.
No, they
Um,
don't.
so I think Colorado really lucked into a pretty good situation.
So it's
Not that
telling us
they're
here
not that
that
they're
after
not
the
good. Don't get me wrong. I'm not dissing them for that, but I'm just saying, and again, you never know how the schedule's going to break. But Colorado, as it turned out, kind of had the easier path here.
well, that was supposed to be the case for Utah as well, but obviously it's not quite worked out for them.
Yeah.
So yeah, we get into all this common opponent business. So it would depend on who the teams are that obviously tie to figure
Right.
out their common opponents. And then when you're looking at, again, I don't even want to start in on it because there's too many teams to configure a bunch of various situations. So
Right.
bottom line, everybody, BYU and Arizona State play this weekend. The winner of that game will control their own destiny.
That's
And
right.
of course, the other team, Colorado, controls its own destiny, and they've got Oklahoma State coming up, I know, and Kansas coming up first for Colorado, and then they've got to face that vaunted 0-7 Oklahoma State team. But hey, with a veteran quarterback and with all those guys that played 21 or 20 starters coming back from that team that was
Yeah.
supposed to go to the Big 12 championship game,
Yeah.
wouldn't it be crazy if they were the ones that threw this all out of whack and brought in some kind of tiebreaker because they pulled off an upset the final Saturday.
Let's let's not throw Kansas out with the dishwater. This is a what if, but if they'd gotten off to a faster start, Kansas, they'd be much farther along. They'd be tough to beat in a playoff format. They're not going to get there, but they're much better than anybody's giving them credit for as well.
I agree. And you look at they just lost a lot of close games.
Yeah, they did.
They're like 0-5 or 1-5 in games decided by a few points or less. And we were talking about that when they came in to play ASU, seemingly a lifetime ago. That they had a tendency of giving up scores late in the half and late in the last minute of the game. But yeah, they're not a bad team. They just came up short. In a lot of close games.
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah, just to get back to your earlier point, and I think we're all three in agreement that while the divisions would cause these situations where fans would get disgruntled because, okay, the best team in the conference is playing the fourth best team in the conference because the three best teams in the conference are on one side, at least basically you just said, okay, who's the best team in that division? Oh, it's that team? Oh, maybe it's those two teams. Oh, they played. There was a tiebreaker. Done. That's it.
Right.
And I could only find 3 occasions since conference championship play started where there were 3 teams tied for a division championship, and you had to go to then common opponents and all of that. But basically, it was almost always settled by the head-to-head matchup. Now we got this situation where hardly any of these teams play each other. So you're coming up with a tiebreaker that doesn't even really isn't that relevant, isn't that valid, I should say.
No, and I agree. And the other thing you got to look at too is who knows who's going to be a good team and a bad team one year to the next. And we've seen how Arizona flipped the script in 1 year. Arizona State flipped the script in a year.
Well, Arizona
with
did too.
The transfer portal makes it much easier to flip the script.
Yes, it does.
Yeah, so if you try to balance the schedules, to your point, if you try to balance the schedules, which I am all for, but it was more, again, a more valid approach a few years ago to say, okay, well, we're going to try to make these very balanced, fair schedules based on last year's standings.
Right.
But that doesn't always work out. And it's working out less and less as we go forward.
The only thing anybody wants is good football. That's what people want to watch. Usually conference championship mini tournament would bring those 4 teams together to get a true champion, to get the seeds, if you get any, in the college football playoff. The Big 12 and the ACC are in the same boat. They're both swimming in the same direction, towing that boat. And at the end of the day, they need help from these other conferences to get more than one team in. If BYU loses, well, I don't see a pattern where BYU wins out, loses in the championship game, and gets an at-large. I don't see anybody getting one. It's win and you're in, and maybe you get help, but it'll be tough.
Yeah, I don't think the Big 12 is going to get more than one team, and the ACC either. I mean, we all know that there's SEC bias, and they do play a rigorous schedule, but we know that bias is there. So I think both of those conferences, it's one bid, and it's get in the conference championship game and when you're in, and I think that's it.
Yeah.
I would generally agree. And we've got a rhetorical question coming in from our buddy Mike 3883. Basically, how many years have the top 3 teams in the Big 12 been in the Big 12 combined? I think he knows the answer to that question.
Yeah,
I'll make a point there.
I think 1 1 year.
1 times 3, which is amazing. I don't know how to interpret that. I don't know if the old guard of the Big 12 is kind of grumbling, thinking, it makes our conference look bad when 3 new teams come in and they dominate the conference and they're at the top of the conference, or you just figure, hey, we're a stronger conference now.
In my opinion, bringing in the four corners schools made the conference stronger. And what's happened at Arizona and what's happened at Utah is going to become more frequent. The chances that we just have a perennial power step up and dominate this conference in 5 years is very remote, in my opinion. And we could have a series of champions year in, year out that never are replicated and go from season to season. Arizona State could win it this year. Utah could win it the next. I think the only teams that really may struggle in this format we currently have are Cincinnati. I think Cincinnati really, they have a long way to travel, and they don't have everything built up like West Virginia does. And at UCF, they've got some institutional things that they're challenged with. So at the end of the day, the conference is a mess, and it's a lot of fun to watch. But I wanted BYU to get the championship game and lose a close one to Colorado, so they got two teams in. That's what I was shooting for.
I'll tell you one thing. I've learned is we got spoiled in the Pac-12. My travel this year, it's been really
Yes.
difficult.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. I mean, down to the Oklahoma State game where we got rain delayed by 3 hours at the half. And then I drove back from Stillwater to Oklahoma City in a monsoon. And then my hotel got evacuated with a tornado warning at 2 o'clock in the morning.
Oh no.
Yeah, so that was not a lot of fun. And even, Manhattan's a 2-hour drive from Kansas City, so you're
Yeah.
driving in. I got back to my hotel about 3:30 in the morning, got up at 5, got on a plane, flew back to
Wow.
Phoenix, and then covered a basketball game. So
Wow, that's crazy.
I got really spoiled being able to get on a plane and basically go anywhere in the Pac-12 nonstop. And most of them you could get there in an hour and a half. So I was warned of this. I knew it was going to be an issue. So rest in peace, Pac-12 as we knew it. I miss that.
Well, yeah, we've got the Pac-2 going, of course, and they're
Yep.
trying to salvage things by bringing in the Mountain West, but it's never going to be the same. It's never going to be the quality that it
Right.
was. And we saw a somewhat college football playoff fraud of Washington State at 8-1 get exposed by all teams New Mexico this past
Yeah, it
weekend.
was
So that
not
showed
good.
you what's going on there. Michelle, we know you got a lot going on and need to move on, but before you take off, we'd love to get your take on this, because as the records obviously mount the losses by the top teams, with BYU getting knocked off and who knows how many more losses there could be. We could have maybe a couple 7-2 teams in the conference play in the conference championship game. Mike is asking here, with Boise State red hot, and of course Army's looming out there with a date against Notre Dame, is it possible the Big 12 gets the 5th highest conference spot in the playoffs? And just to clarify for everyone, the top 4 conference champions get the byes. And so it's always been assumed those are going to be the 4 power conferences. But we got Boise State looming out there.
Oh, I don't even know what to make of that. I debate this every single week. I'm not all in on Indiana yet. Again, that's a team that hasn't played the best teams in that conference.
Yeah.
The only thing I could say about Boise, they did darn near beat Oregon. Now, granted, that was 100 years ago, like very
Yeah, it
early
was.
in the season, but I just don't see how the strength of schedule for Boise State would lend itself to being ahead of the Big 12. I have a hard time with that. Um, I do. I have a hard
understand. I
time
do
with that.
too. I'm right there with you. I've got a ton of respect for Boise State, but there's a difference between getting psyched up and primed for one game
One
against an
game.
Oregon and
Yeah.
then going into a Mountain West where you are clearly the best team
Yes.
and you're routing everyone by 3 or 4 touchdowns versus going through the grind of playing top 25 to 40 teams week after week after week after week.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, I agree. And we have the Fiesta Bowl here, and usually the Big 12 champion goes to the Fiesta Bowl. And I'm sure the last thing that the Fiesta Bowl probably wants to see is Boise State here instead of the Big 12 champion. Now, nothing against Boise State, but
Right.
when you look at the fan bases from the Big 12, that's a great trip to Phoenix. And I was at a Fiesta Bowl function several weeks ago, and we were talking about scenarios in which the Big 12 champion would not be in the Fiesta Bowl. And I was basically told it would be, Boise State winning out and then the Big 12 cannibalizing itself, which basically we're kind of starting to see. But I don't think Boise State deserves a spot ahead of an ACC school or a Big 12 school.
Good stuff.
Yeah, I completely agree. Boise's coming back to the pack, right? Everybody now sees they're playing the San Jose States and Nevadas of the world, and that's not to knock those schools, but at the end of the day, competition should matter. And 10-2, sorry, 11-2, Colorado is not going to lose a spot to Boise State. They're not going to lose a spot to BYU or ASU. If something crazy happened and Iowa State got in there with 3 losses, that maybe, but any 2-loss team is worth, in my opinion, they're better put together than a 1-loss Boise team that's been beaten on puppies.